welcome back to Craic on the Coast, your home for all things Irish, from the windswept shores of Plymouth, Massachusetts to the green heart of Ireland herself. I'm your host, Michael Schilling, and with Sean Morgan being out of the booth for today, I'm met with someone who's already been on the show once already, Mr. John Sullivan, who is a member of our AOH division as well as the South Shore Irish Heritage Trail. Hey, John.
How's it going, Mike?
Good. Thank you for joining us. Today on the show, we're basically going to walk, no pun intended, walk through our recent trip that we undertook, the Father John Murphy division, which we've talked about before here on the show, which was our Hibernian Hunger Walk, which was along the National Famine Way from Roscommon to Dublin, Ireland, 100 miles over 6 days. We have our story to share, history behind the walk, and what our experiences were after we got to Dublin. So I would probably start off by just kind of saying, give your impressions first, John, about what your experience was, and then we'll get into the details of like along the way.
Sure. It was an amazing experience. This was the second time that our division has gone to Ireland as a group. The first time we were there for the centenary of the Easter Rising in Easter of 2016. And then 9 years on, this was actually your idea, Mike. It was a phenomenal idea because the National Famine Way in Ireland, as you know, is a relatively new trail, and it replicates the route that 1,490 tenants took from Strokestown, County Roscommon, all the way along the Royal Canal into the city of Dublin. And it was quite an experience. There's an old expression, tortoises can tell you more of the roads than hares. And to see Ireland on foot was rather extraordinary.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It was, we did not go fast.
Oh, no.
But we definitely saw areas of the country that I don't think either one of us would have seen if it wasn't for what we undertook.
No, we wouldn't. And one of the things that I will never forget is the first day we were walking out of Strokestown. We're walking through these beautiful backcountry areas, and we heard the cuckoo.
Yeah.
And the Irish have always believed when you hear the cuckoo, that's a sign of good luck. And then day two, Geraldine and I heard it as well. So that was a good sign, a good harbinger, if you will.
Yeah. Not for the weather.
Not for the weather, but as they say, no one's ever gone to Ireland twice for a tan.
That's right.
But share with the folks all that we heard the time we were there about the weather.
Yeah. So routinely we would hear the statement, you should have came here last week, because of how beautiful the weather had been there 3 weeks leading up to when we were there. And from what I understand, since we've left, it's been pretty nice too.
God bless us. Yeah.
But just so we'll give like a kind of a day-by-day little synopsis of the trip, what we experienced, and to give listeners an idea if they want to undertake the walk, what they would encounter while they're doing it.
Sure.
So basically we flew in on the 22nd of May?
We landed on the 23rd.
23rd. That's right. We flew out on the 22nd, landed on the 23rd of May.
In Shannon.
Got in the car, drove to Strokestown, gave ourselves enough time to pack our backpacks and started walking.
Well, you left out one crucial fact. Before we get into the van, we had a substantial breakfast.
Yes.
And every day we had a massive meal because we really didn't stop for lunches.
No, not at all.
So we just would have a big meal, would burn it off walking, and then have a massive meal at the end of the day. So that's what we did day one.
Yeah.
And the folks in Strokestown at the hotel we stayed at, named after a local poet, Percy French, they let us keep our nicer clothes there, and then we strapped on the backpacks and off we went.
Right. And it was smart. The first day is the shortest. So that's what gave us the initiative to kind of land and just go. because I think it was the first day like 10 miles?
I thought it was 11 miles.
11 miles?
11 miles.
Was the shortest day. So that was what we undertook. We were able to get through it. And then we got to the first point along the trail, which is Termonbury. And
Great town.
Stayed at an absolutely fabulous accommodation, Keenan's hotel and public house. And we basically had enough energy to get there, have dinner, and collapse.
And the beauty of that was first of all, it was day one. We were on fumes because we really hadn't had a proper night's sleep. You never do when you fly over. But to just get there, drop our bags, have a nice pint, then freshen up, and then we met up with the rest of our crew.
Right.
Had dinner that night, and then went up to our rooms, and the rooms look out over the River Shannon. I mean, that was extraordinary. And then next morning, massive breakfast, strapped on the backpacks, and then we're on our way.
Off again.
Yeah.
Second day, we made our way out of Tarmanbury, and I believe that day was 15 miles.
Yeah, it was an uptick again. We connected with the Royal Canal at a place called Richmond Harbor.
Correct.
And that's where the canal and the Shannon, I think, intersect. And that's why that's called the harbor. And it's kind of strange. And we were struck by that, I think. Going along the canal, they would call harbors just areas where the canals were made wider for boats that wanted to stay put for a longer period of time. But Richmond Harbor was the first real one we saw, and that's where we got on along the canal and started the walk from that point.
Right. And one thing I definitely want to inform listeners about, it's something that I thought was really intriguing, was getting to know and understand the community that is the boating along the Grand Canal.
Yes.
And how people basically will retire and spend their retirement just running the canal up to the Shannon, back down to Dublin, and then just do the route all over again.
We'll talk about Kevin and his wife.
Right.
Yeah.
So on the second day, amongst the rain and everything else that was going on, along the Grand Canal is this lock system, which is as old as the canal itself. Basically what it does is it allows for the elevation changes along the length of the canal for the boats to be able to travel. So it's a system where on one side it's a high water line, the boat waits. There's dam levees that allow this middle section to fill up to the high point so that the boat can come in, and then it drains the water out so then it can release and then go along its way. We had come across several of them before we came across Kevin and his wife, who were on a boat and were looking to operate the lock system. And our one of the members of our group, Ken Miller, was very excited at the idea that we were actually going to be able to operate the lock system, which was really neat. And it's amazing that they're as old as they are, and it's all there's no really modern mechanics to it. It is
Not
just
at all.
It's just like a lever, and after that, it's just dams and drainage, and it was really interesting to watch the process happen. It was really neat to be able to participate.
Well, as Ken said, he said, "Look, I would have paid to do this, to work the lock mechanism." So he got the biggest kick out of that.
Yeah, and we were able to have a conversation with the folks who were on it as well.
Yeah, they shared with us that this was built in Liverpool, I think, about 10 years ago. They keep it in Dublin, but this journey was to go to the Shannon, where they were going to spend the summer and then come back to Dublin in September.
Right.
And we later found out that most of these locks, by the way, had little lock houses adjoining them, next to them. And back in the day, there would be about 8 men working each lock. And they were told, you've got to get the boat in, get the boat through the lock and out within 3 minutes or you're fined.
Right.
Which is an extraordinarily quick chunk of time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
8 individuals, they're all working at once
Big time.
to make that happen. but it was great to meet them. They gave us the lowdown on the whole process of how they operate and how they live their lives now and everything else. And Kevin was nice enough to let us know of an establishment, as he put it, a little ways down the road, to have and stop and have a bite to eat and a pint. Little did we know it was going to be 2 days later
Exactly.
that we finally got there.
Oh, yeah.
But still, they were really good people, and he told us to tell them to let them know Kevin sent us. So that was extraordinary, and that was interesting, and that was just day 2. As we made our way into day 3, at that point, unfortunately, I had to take a break because of an ailing knee due to everything we were carrying on our backs at that point. I really do believe that.
It was a lot of weight.
It was.
Yeah.
And that would be for anyone interested in undertaking the walk. I would say that would be a huge recommendation, would be to bring someone or to try to set up that your belongings are brought from point to point instead of carrying 15 to 20 pounds on your back.
Because it really did make a big difference when you were able, or other Steve was able to have our backpacks, the majority of them, just shipped from point A to point B, the next place we were staying. It lightened the load, and it also increased the pace of everybody's walk, because think about it, we didn't have all that weight on our backs.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the second day too was, I just remembered this, on the second day was also the day that we encountered the peat farm.
Yes.
Because we went looking for that visitor center that we never found. But we came across a peat farm where they had everything, all the peat cut, and then they had it stacked to air out and everything else. That was really interesting. What I would tell people who are listening is that if you're listening on either Apple or Spotify, I've talked with our producers here, and on the YouTube feed, we're going to be able to put a slideshow of all our photos that we took that people will be able to look at while they're listening to this podcast. I think that would be really good for people to kind of get a perspective on what we encountered and what we're talking about. The peat farm we have photos of when we were at the peat farm, the lock system.
Oh,
we have
sure.
photos of that. So I would recommend people, if you listen to it on Apple or Spotify, to also go over to YouTube so that you can have access to those photos. Because I think it really will give you more of a picture of what we were walking through during that time.
And one of the interesting aspects of the canals is they were built in the early 1800s. I want to say they were completed 1815 to 1820, but they stopped commercial operation in the late 50s. So when they had an influx of EU money, I believe, they were able to restore the canals, restore the lock mechanism. So while we were walking along them, they were perfectly navigable. All of the locks seemed to be in great shape. And that's one of the things that struck, I think, all of us, is how relatively easy it was to walk along those routes, because either gravel or pavement, and it was very smooth, very easy to walk upon.
Yeah, and the greenway was very well kept. I mean, we came across a couple of guys that worked for the waterways department, and they said that it's a job to keep weeds and everything else so that the greenway is, in the condition it is right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So as we made our way, we went into, like I said, day 3. I wasn't able to join the rest of the group, but at that point, there was myself and another individual of our group that were transferring luggage and backpacks and everything else to make it easier on the rest of the crew that was walking. And you probably got the best weather out of the entire 6 days that day.
It was beautiful weather, although the last day was also pretty good, because the last day, the day we walked into Dublin, was the one day I wish I had shorts. It was that warm. And I was an optimist because the weather had been unbelievable for the 3 weeks leading up, and I had packed shorts. Suffice to say, I never got to put them on.
Sure.
But, in Ireland, when the clouds come over, the temps drop. But when the sun comes out, the temps rocket up. And on the last day, it was pretty sunny.
Yeah.
Really was.
And that was another
Beautiful.
thing we did talk about, not to make ourselves feel any better about the weather, but if the sun was out for the majority of the time we were walking, I think dehydration and water would have been an issue.
Oh, for sure. But as it was, I mean, we were very vigilant about keeping hydrated. We were very vigilant about stopping every hour, 2 hours, stretch our muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it minimized the impact on our bodies. I mean, that one day where we walked to Moy Valley, that was a 22-mile day.
Right. So that was day 4. Day 4.
Yeah.
Day 3 brought us into the very lovely village of Mullingar.
Yes. The high point on the canal.
Correct. The high point on the canal and pretty close to the highest point in the entire country. Correct?
Yeah, relatively speaking. Yeah, there's certain mountains, but the general elevation in that section is yes.
Yeah. So Mullingar was very interesting. For anyone who has never been to Ireland or are not a consistent traveler to Ireland, I don't know if I would have them go on our itinerary. I think given the ability for someone to stay and spend a day in the individual villages we were in, I think would be hugely beneficial.
Yes.
I mean, individuals like ourselves who make a point of going over either because we have family or connections that bring us over at a pretty regular interval. You know, we talked that there would be like Termonbury would be an ideal spot. Maynooth would be a spot.
Oh, yeah.
Mullingar would be a spot that we would want to go after being there for the few hours we were there. You'd want to go back
and spend more time.
Spend more time.
Exactly.
And learn more of the area. And, you know, like we've always said, there's history in every village.
Everywhere.
You know. So someone who doesn't have that ability, I think I would recommend that they extend their itinerary.
I mean, one of the great things about Ireland, and you learn it pretty quickly as you travel around, is any area, any region has unique history to that area. And you are also very cognizant of the fact that people have lived there, not for hundreds, but for thousands of years. So there's layer upon layer upon layer of history wherever you go in Ireland. For example, I mean, you and I were in Maynooth, and there is the remnants of a Geraldine castle that initially was built around 1126. And then nearby is a beautiful old yew tree. Now, yew trees were sacred. They have certain properties, but the tree didn't look magnificent or anything. It was just large. Well, it turns out that tree, they estimate, is about 800 years old. And it's a reminder, in this one little college town, Maynooth, is the remnants of a castle that's over 800 years old, as well as a tree that's almost the same age.
Right.
And that's just one place in Ireland. And that's true from Donegal to Cork to Wexford to Clare.
Right. And we've been bringing up little magical moments, I should say, along the trip. And we ended that day in Maynooth. We started the day leaving Mullingar. One of the most, I don't even know how to describe it. One of the most interesting and maybe poignant moments of the trip was that John was checking out of his hotel, and we're still trying to figure out who did this.
Oh, in Mullingar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have ideas of who it is, but I have to confirm. But when John was checking out of his hotel, the woman at the desk asked if they had a Michael in their group, which would be myself. And John responded, well, yes, we do. And she said that someone had dropped this off for us, and someone had made 4 fresh St. Bridget's crosses.
Green.
For everybody in the group. Just
Yeah.
been made as a token to get us through the rest of the trip. And, you know, it's tough. Obviously, every culture has, their welcoming factor. But man, that was an amazing thing. And to say it didn't give me like a little bit of an extra like giddy up in my step.
Yeah.
Being halfway through at that point and looking down the longest day, which was that 4th day.
Yeah.
It was something. It was definitely, I will never forget that.
Well, I think I was struck by the fact that the Irish people themselves were sort of took a step back and said, wow, these Americans are taking the time to re-experience this trail that was a tragedy for these families because they'd never see their home again. But it's also a reminder, like when you go to Ireland, you can dig as deep as you want. You can make the experience as rich as you want to. It's out there if people want to take the time to do it. And this was something we'll not soon forget.
No, not at all. So as we were saying, that fourth day from Mullingar to Maynooth, it's the longest day
No,
of
that
the
was Moy Valley.
Oh, that's correct.
Moy Valley.
Moy Valley. Yeah. Moy Valley. That was the longest leg of the trip. 22 miles. We started at 8:30 in the morning. We finished at 5 in the afternoon. And according to Ken's Fitbit,
yep,
it was 46,300 steps.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. And that is, that's every time I've given anyone that number, that's where it really like hits them and goes, wow,
sure,
that is a long way.
Oh, and the other thing is, from the moment we set foot on that trail to the moment we get off the trail, it rained the whole time.
The whole time. The whole time.
Now, it doesn't rain in Ireland like it can here. It's not lashing rain, but it'll rain, then it'll soften up. It'll be like misty, and then it'll rain a little bit more.
Right.
But the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
And at that point, when we got to Moy Valley, is when we got to the pub that Kevin,
Correct.
2 days before, said
Correct.
we eventually were going to hit. So we were able to stop there, have ourselves a pint, and then, as was with every evening, get to our accommodation, have something to eat, and then.
Well, that's where we said to the woman who was serving us, we said, oh, Kevin said to say hello. And she kind of looked at us funny and said, no, we met him a few days ago on his canal barge going towards the Shannon. And that's when she chirped up, oh, he and his wife are going to be in the Shannon until September. And then we'll see them when they come back.
Right.
Yeah.
Another amazing thing that happened on that day that goes to what occurred on our trip afterwards that I think would be great to share with folks, was while we were walking on that fourth day is when I got a phone call from the home of the President of Ireland in his office. And that is when we confirmed that we were going to get an opportunity to sit with him and have a moment with him and present him with some tokens of our appreciation. And that was something I didn't know if it was going to happen. I didn't really share it with a lot of people that it could happen because you don't want to let anyone down.
No.
But it was for us to basically over the next, after we got through Maynooth, then it was Maynooth to Dublin.
Correct. That was the last leg.
That was the last leg. And that would have been that Wednesday. We got to Dublin. We gave ourselves enough time to get into our accommodations and freshen up and everything else. And then from there, we took a taxi.
We looked less scruffy than we had the previous 6 days.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we met up with some more individuals, one of which we have not mentioned her name on this show yet, is Professor Catherine Shannon, who is, I don't know how would you describe her, John?
She is one of the more revered figures in academia, Irish academia, that is on the planet. And
she lives and she is from the South Shore.
So I'm from the South Shore, born and raised in Hingham.
Yep.
Taught in Westfield for a number of years, studied in Dublin, studied in Galway, studied in Belfast. She was very instrumental in the peace process, knew John Hume and his wife very well, knew Seamus Heaney and his wife very well, knows a lot of the people, and was able to do tremendous work for getting a peaceful resolution to the conflict that had gone on for years in the North. But she's also encyclopedic in her knowledge of Irish history. And
especially with regards to the famine era.
oh yeah, yeah, she knows it backwards and forwards. And we've referenced the shipwreck of the brig St. John, which was the worst single shipwreck in the history of the South Shore. But Catherine Shannon is the foremost expert in the world on that shipwreck.
Correct. And with her being in her, position and everything else, she happened to be in Ireland at the same time as we were going to be taking our walk. So we agreed that we would meet in Dublin. And as much as I would like to think our little division that could open the door to meet President Higgins, I really probably would have the reality that it was her name that got us in the door.
Well, to watch those two interact, it's like they were dear old friends.
Yes.
And it was so sweet to watch Catherine and President Higgins just talk to each other. And it's like they were renewing the ties that had existed for years between the two of them, because sure enough, they had met two previous times.
Right. And we got the deluxe tour, I would say, of the president's residence. We were treated very nicely by everybody there. Got a lot of the history, little nuggets of knowledge from the sergeant of arms that was there and everything else.
Paul Mulligan.
Was that his last name?
And then the other officer was Patrick Tobin. And what was interesting about Patrick Tobin is he was from Enniscorthy, County Wexford, which is right near where Bula Vogue was, which
Sure.
is where the man for whom our division is named, Father John Murphy, lived. And he was a hero of the Rising of 1798. So I think Officer Tobin loved hearing those connections.
Oh, definitely.
But that Sergeant Mulligan was unbelievable, talking about, this is where JFK planted a tree. This is where Pope John Paul, this is where Pope Francis planted a tree.
Right, because it is customary that any dignitary that shows up and visits the president, that is what they bring.
Mm-hmm.
They bring a tree to plant on the property.
Yes.
And they go out and they actually select the location and everything else. That was probably the one prior to actually meeting President Higgins and actually getting to sit down with him when we were going through that tour. And Paul looked at us and said, where you guys are standing, that's where John F. Kennedy would have stood to sign the guest book and for his first introduction to the president of Ireland when he came for his visit. The same with Pope John Paul II.
Yes.
Even though we don't see her in a great light as being Hibernians, Queen Victoria, you're talking about major people that affected world history.
Pope John Paul.
Yeah. It was, that really is what made me stop when we were going on that tour.
I think he said Charles de Gaulle had a particular affinity for Ireland as well, and traveled back several times and was at the, what is it called? Arasa Nuchtaran.
Correct.
Is the name of the residence of the president. And he was impressive. Sergeant Mulligan was impressive as far as his knowledge of the home, which was magnificent, tall ceilings and beautiful appointments and spectacular views. And he was very generous in sharing of his time and of the history of the place. Right.
And we were very lucky, at towards the end of the tour, that's when we were greeted by President Higgins himself. Him, like you said, John, him and Catherine had a very nice interaction, going through, memories they've had of being in each other's company. We had a very special opportunity where we were able to present him with a commemorative pin from our Brig St. John celebration, that he was so nice to send over his accolades, written in a letter that we were able to read at the event. So overall, I would say that was a really good day for the Father John.
It was an incredible day. And now you got to pick up, and we
Right.
That was not the end of the day.
No, that
by
was
any
not the end of
means.
the day.
Yes.
We were very lucky afterwards to then be escorted over to the Dáil, which is Ireland's government building, where their parliament convenes. And we were able to get a tour of that building as well. We have a very good friend and acquaintance, Paul McAuliffe, who is a TD in the Irish government. And he invited us in to take a tour of the Dáil and be able to see areas that I probably never would have thought of in my lifetime.
Not at all.
To be standing outside the office that Michael Collins would have called his office.
Yeah.
That was an amazing thing. To say I didn't go over and touch the door, to be able to actually sit in.
That's right. We were able to sit as the Senate was debating a particular issue, and then the speaker at the podium gave the AOH recognition that we were there.
Correct.
Which was also another highlight of a very special day.
And then we were very lucky in that, I feel like we keep using the word lucky a lot, but the whole trip, it must have been the cuckoo.
Just carried right through.
We then were able to sit down, have a great dinner.
Phenomenal dinner.
With everyone and have conversation and have discussion about just not necessarily just being Irish, but just of how things are right now and where not just the world, but the country itself and how we have an affinity for it and the knowledge and the education that goes along with that.
We had a great discussion about potential candidates for the next president of Ireland.
Correct.
Because President Higgins' term is up in, I think, 6 months.
Yeah.
So we had a lively discussion about that.
Right. And towards the end of that evening, we then had the opportunity to meet the current Tánaiste, Simon Harris. For people that aren't familiar with the way the Irish government works, the president is really more kind of like the ultimate ambassador.
Yes.
For the country.
Not a tremendous amount of political power. It's more a representative of the country.
Right.
Yes.
And then they have the Taoiseach and the Tánaiste, which is like a prime minister and a vice prime minister.
Yes.
So who we met was the Tánaiste, the vice prime minister, Mr. Simon Harris. And again, another great opportunity to sit, have a short discussion with him. It felt like everybody we ran into was totally enamored with Catherine Shannon.
Absolutely.
And everybody had an interest in her opinion on one item or another. We're talking so much about her, I feel like, and me and you have had this discussion. For a woman who has spent the entirety of her life, the majority of her 85 years on this planet, writing and talking about others in history, I think it would really be beneficial to have her come on and record and talk about her.
It'd be huge. I think it'd be difficult for her to do because she is much better talking about her perspective of history,
correct,
historical figures, than she would be talking about herself.
Right.
But she has a compelling story. Her grandparents were victims of the Great Hunger. When you think
all four of
the
them.
fact, yes, when you think of the fact the Great Hunger happened from 1845 to 1852, you think of how long ago that was, which is really pretty amazing. But for example, Catherine referenced some obscure aspect of litigation, I think, or legislation that was coming up in the Dáil. And I remember Paul McAuliffe saying, most people in this building don't even know what that is. How do you know? And then when she had the opportunity to talk to Simon Harris, and he was so down, he said, call me Simon, call me Simon.
Yep.
I mean, very down-to-earth people. And to watch him engage with Catherine, you could tell he was acutely listening to all she had to say, because it was clear to him as here is an American who knows what's going on in this country, in our country, in Ireland.
And who spend a decent amount of time living
Many years.
in the country of Ireland.
She was in Dublin when JFK visited in June of 63.
That's right.
She remembers seeing him in Dublin in June of 63.
Right.
Yeah.
So that kind of ended the night. I mean, the night didn't end. We kind of closed the Doyle down that evening because
tremendous.
But it was tremendous.
Yeah.
It was an absolute. Everybody in our group said that would be a day that they would never forget. I mean, it was just something that doesn't happen in most people's lives.
Not at all.
We were very fortunate that we were able to experience that. From there, you would think from there it couldn't really top out anymore. But we had ourselves another day and a half in Dublin.
Yes.
We got to tour a couple of the sites. We got to go in front of the GPO. We got to go to a couple of the museums and everything else and just really enjoy the city of Dublin. Like I said numerous times, the last time I was there, it was just after COVID, everything had opened up, and it definitely was not as busy as it was when we were there a week ago.
And then on that Thursday, we all met at noon in front of Bewley's on Grafton Street, and we were all remarking, like, do you believe all this foot traffic? And for those who don't know, Grafton Street is an old road that now only, I think, allows vehicles, and only in certain times. The rest of the time, it's purely pedestrian traffic, and it is packed.
Yeah. Dublin is a great city. Like I remember talking to someone who had not been over to the States, and I think this would be well for anyone who lives in our area and has not been over to Ireland yet. I feel like Dublin would remind you of Boston. It's a very walkable city.
Compact.
It's not overburdening like New York City is. It's a capital city, but it definitely would remind you more of Boston than it would New York.
Much, much more so. And it's friendlier. You don't have massive skyscrapers.
Correct.
And you got many, many, many people walking. A lot of the roadways now are restricted. You've got the light rail, what they call the Luas, Luas, which just means light in Irish. You've got taxi and bus lanes. So it's becoming more and more geared toward pedestrians.
Correct.
Rather than cars, especially the heart of the city.
Right. And at the end, for anyone who's never been there before, there's the historical markers that are obviously throughout the city, especially if you are a heavy in the history of the Rising, between the GPO, Kilmainham Jail, multiple other, some sites that you brought us to that I would never have been aware of, such as like where they gave their surrender and everything else. Those were
there's Moore Street, and then where the last headquarters, and then where the O'Rahilly was killed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there was places very like, not a lot of pomp and circumstance to them, just little kind of nondescript plaques, but obviously, places that hold a lot of historical impact. And then we went, we drove through Phoenix Park on our way to the Arras, and that was, that really is a beautiful area. But for people who've never been there before, at the very end of the National Famine Way is the Jenny Johnston and the Epic Museum, which if you are, no matter how many generations removed, those are must-see places.
The Jenny Johnston, just for the listeners, bore the distinction of the only ship during the Great Hunger that transported passengers that did not lose one passenger. And what was very unusual about this ship is they had a doctor on board. And I don't recall the name of the doctor, I'll think of it, but he was able to prevent anybody from dying on the ship. And when you think about it, it would be things like typhus or the fevers that would, or cholera, that would spread like wildfire because there were not sanitary conditions. And I would imagine having a doctor there, he would have demanded fastidious cleanliness that thus prevented anybody from dying. Another interesting nugget about the Jeannie Johnston, when the ship, the original, finally sunk mid-Atlantic, there was another ship nearby, so they did not lose one passenger.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this replica, which is right in the Liffey, right near the Epic Museum, is a reminder, and it's open to the public, a reminder of what one of these ships looked like in the late 1840s, 1850s, when the first massive wave of immigrants were fleeing the Great Hunger.
And I think that's a great segue into the last portion of our trip. Was after we were done, we made our way back to Strokestown for what's called the Great Hunger Institute Summer School Conference that they hold annually. And we had the opportunity to go back to Strokestown, go to Strokestown Park. I would recommend everyone to Google it, go on their website, see what it is. It's impressive what they've done there. I mean, they took what probably during that time period was an image of anguish, because you had this great manor being occupied by elite, and it was the very inhabitants of it that sent these 1,400 people, half of them to their death.
That's right.
By going on this walk.
Yeah.
And then, like we were saying, when you're done with the walk, there's a end of trail booklet that they hand you, which has a litany of statistics, stories. To this day, they're still trying to track down descendants of the 1,400 people.
Yes.
But one of the things they put on there is how many of them actually made it.
Correct.
And, when it was all said and done, nearly half didn't make it to the ships in Liverpool.
That's right.
And then nearly half did not make the trek over the Atlantic.
Well, Mike, when you think about, first of all, we hiked the width of Ireland, and we had on proper footwear. We had waterproof clothing from head to toe, and we go to a hotel every night. We were warm. We could be clean. We could have food. These people were probably compromised from the minute they set out. They had not had proper food, probably for months, if not years, before they embarked on their trip. The children, it's a miracle any children survived.
Right.
And they would have had to sleep in the open.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the incredible hardships these people suffered. And then to get on a boat and go right across the Atlantic into the wind to Canada, that in and of itself was an awful journey.
Right. And like you were saying, in most cases on these ships, the conditions were horrid.
Horrific. Absolutely horrific. Because the ship owners didn't really care. The only way that there were improvements is because the English were shamed into it when more and more and more reports came out about the mortality rate. One of the ships, I think, had over a 50% mortality rate. That's unconscionable.
Right.
And there is blame somewhere. I mean, the reason that they required sufficient number of lifeboats and ships after the Titanic was because of the magnitude of the Titanic.
Right.
In a similar vein, there were more and more hearings, and the British government was called to account for permitting these ships to have such horrific conditions that so many people died. They never made it. And the ship owners still collected their fares, whether the person died at day one or made it all the way across.
Right. And I would say that's the largest item. Again, the Famine Way itself is not that old.
Not at all.
Strokestown Park is not that old.
Well, Mike, you think about it, the backstory was this car dealer in Strokestown was interested in buying a little bit of property, and he talked to one of the descendants, the last woman to live there, who was, at the time he approached her, I think she was in her 80s, He said, I'd just like to buy a little bit, just a few acres. She said no. Then he approached her again with a better offer. She said, I don't want to sell the land. She said, I'll sell the whole kit and caboodle. You buy it that way or not at all. He bought it all. And then when he encountered all of these records there, he realized that this was a treasure and this is something that should be preserved historically. It was vital to tell that story. I mean, this was an estate that had 11,000 acres, a staggering amount of land, and they couldn't make a go of it as it had been mismanaged for a long period of time. But when the woman sold it to Jim Callery, who's still alive, by the way. I was just
going to say, we're not talking history here. We're talking modern day.
Right. And his daughter was one of the driving forces, if not the driving force, who we saw several times over the weekend.
Yeah, we had a it was a pleasure to meet her, Caroline.
Amazing person. But again, it was these people who had the foresight and could see beyond to say, this not only has to be preserved, this has to be publicized, this has to be known. We have to share this with Ireland, with America, with Canada, with the world. And they've done a tremendous job doing that.
Which is why now, since the Famine Way has been put in, Strokestown Park is a beautiful site. I would recommend anyone. Again, it's in the middle of the country. It's not on a coast. It's not somewhere that people would normally travel to. But if you're interested in the history, or maybe even the history of your family traces back there.
Yes.
It's definitely an experience to walk through that museum and see everything. And because of that, they've expanded the National Famine Way to the Global Famine Way.
Correct.
And they've started putting together sites in Canada and the US and everything else. I actually reached out today to one of the individuals who used to be the Irish ambassador to Canada, Eamon, and asked him about what the process is. Is there an application process to be put on the Global Famine Way? Because I really do think Boston there's at least two that I could name right off the back of my hand between the Brig St. John and Deer Island that are directly related to
the Great Hunger.
The Great Hunger.
Well, do you remember the markers along the way are bronzed children's shoes that are very similar to the shoes that a child would have had at the time of the walk across Ireland. And there are these bronze markers all the way from the beginning in Strokestown right to Dublin. But we were given the honor of having the actual copy of those bronze shoes at the Brig St. John. And when we proceeded through the church up to the altar for the Brig St. John Mass with the trunk from the brig, we also put those bronze shoes there.
Correct. Which was moving.
Very.
Absolutely moving.
Yeah. That was Professor Christine Keneally, who was also an expert on the Great Hunger, a professor at Quinnipiac College.
Right. Involved with Strokestown and the summer school and everything that they do there.
Yes.
It is, one of the things that was said at the conference, and everybody thinks of the Great Hunger, and you're thinking like, oh, it's the mid 1840s, like it's history. But when you think about it in the terms of generations of families, it's not that far removed.
One of the more powerful statements Christine Keneally shared with our group when she was the keynote speaker a few years ago is the term eugenetics. And what it means is that any people carry a trauma 5 generations after that trauma. So anyone who is listening to this or is of Irish descent, our families have lived through that 5 generations ago. And really, it was not that long ago. And when you think about it, those people who lived through the Great Hunger, their ancestors lived through the penal laws, which were the real dark days of Irish history, where everything that could be done to eradicate the history, the heritage, the language, the music, everything. All the rights of the native Irish people were done to those people, and they persevered, made it to the Great Hunger, and then that trauma had an enormous impact on the culture. And as many people know, the Irish were among the tallest men in all of Europe. And they know that from the enlistment records in the British Army. They were among the people who got married earliest. Then, after the Great Hunger, they got married latest or not at all because of all the insecurity and the emotional upheaval that this potato blight brought upon the entire country.
Yeah. So if I was, just because I feel like we could talk about all this stuff for so long, but we have limitations. But what I would say to anyone listening is that I understand the idea of possibly getting on a plane and going on a quote unquote vacation, and the idea of just walking this path might not be something that you really would be, the first choice that you would have. What I would say is to dip your toes in the water first. If you're a local, go to Cohasset, see the granite cross and the granite bench that commemorates the Brig St. John. Come to our event that we have every year in October to remember those that perished on that day. Go up to the Deer Island Memorial and stand there and reflect and look up the history.
And imagine what it was like for those people who had fled and left all they knew. And they were so close to where they wanted to build their new home. And there they are on a quarantine station, looking out at Boston. And so many of them never made it.
Right. What I would also say is, we really want to promote the National Famine Way. We think it's a great endeavor. It's very well done and it's growing. And the information is out there. They have a great website. They get into the stories of the families. They can track one family, which I don't want to. I want people to actually go and do their research and go and look and find everything. But what I will say this is, and John and I were talking about this prior to us getting on, they were able to track down one of the survivors. And back in only 2013, during the Great Gathering that the country put together to bring people back to Ireland, they were able to bring back a descendant of one of the 1,490. It was the first time that individual had ever been in Ireland, and he was brought back to Strokestown, and he met, distant relatives and was received with open arms. And I think that's an amazing story, and you can read all about all that on their website, which we will put all their information on the show notes for this podcast so that anyone can look that information up and find out more about the trail and more about the history behind it and more about what they're continuing to do, because they're not done yet.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. And to Mike's point, maybe you don't hike the whole trail. Maybe you hike just for a day or two.
Yeah.
But it gives you a perspective that you'll not see on the roadways. There's a lot more to Ireland than what you see from the windshield of a car.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, walking those days was, yes, it was raining, but it was peaceful, and it allowed us to see parts of the country that we wouldn't normally see and really get a great perspective of what those people must have gone through, to undertake what they did. And a lot of them didn't survive, but the ones that did, what they had to hold on to, I can't even imagine like how you get through the rest of your life knowing and experiencing what they did.
No.
Okay. Well, I think that's going to close it for today. Like I said, any information on the National Famine Way, we're going to provide that in there. Like I also said, on YouTube, we're going to have a slideshow that runs along with the podcast to give you guys all kinds of images of our time spent over the course of those 10 days in Ireland. John, I would like to thank you for coming on the show again.
Oh, no, you're welcome.
You're a great voice of history. Not as much as Catherine Shannon.
No one can hold a candle to her. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. But definitely, I really do think having her come on and we'll let her talk about something else other than herself.
Yeah.
I think the majority of it really should be focused on her. I think
Yes.
that would be having that in entirety and having it in a format that can't disappear.
Yes.
I think that's really important. I think that's important just in all of experiences with people and everything else. There's a lot of people out there that their words shouldn't be just, forgotten after.
Unless you ask questions, unless you're curious, unless you want to dig up and find out what is beneath the surface, you'll never learn a blessed thing.
No.
And there is so much to learn.
Correct. And that's how you make sure you don't repeat history, by learning.
Correct.
So, if you enjoyed the show today, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend. And if you've got a story to tell or a topic you'd love to hear about, reach out to us by emailing us at craiconthecoast@gmail.com. That's CRAIC onthecoast@gmail.com. And you can follow us at AOH Plymouth on both Instagram and Facebook. A lot of the images and photos that we took are on those social media platforms during our time there. So I would recommend checking that out. Also, always check our social media for events that we might have going on. I know in the not too distant future, we're going to be in Whitman at their 150th.
I think it's the 22nd of June.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So Whitman is having a celebration for its birthday, and they're having a parade, and they've invited us to come in and be part of it. So you'll see us there, and then keep an eye on our social media, and you'll see what other events we have going on and what we're involved with. And if you want to participate, you can reach out as well. Always looking for new members of the team. So until next time, slán go fóill, goodbye for now, and may the Craic be mighty wherever you are.